Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Deltarune video. Whoa! uh, it's Undertale night time. And the why do I hear Megalovania has a dual meaning. One, because I'm not doing Sans night, because what am I going to say? He could do anything, essentially. Play Jevel's theme. So that wouldn't really work. And also because I'm kind of a noted Undertale Knights non-believer. So people might be mad with me about this one. But it's fine. I'm going to try my best to present both sides of the argument fairly. All right? And as always, this is like a PowerPoint presentation format. So if you want to listen to it in the background, you won't be missing much. All right, let's go. TRUTHS Knight. We will start at the beginning. I figure we just go from character to character, except I'm saving the most interesting ones for the end. So, Toriel is a Lightner. She's a teacher at the school, so that gives her some opportunity. When is a little bit interesting, though, because we're with Toriel the entire morning during the first chapter, which means that she couldn't have done it in the time, like she couldn't have got to school early and created the fountain, let's say. So that means that the fountain has to have existed for like multiple days. I think we believe at this point that chapter 1 was a Thursday. So it is possible that Toriel was able to create this fountain yesterday, but there is still a little bit of an issue there because Chris going off on their own and doing their own thing and not just going directly home is something that we have introduced to their life. So yeah, I don't know. There's just not quite as much opportunity as you might think for someone who works at the school, you know? We also have the ability to call Toriel on our phone, like, almost the entire game. Obviously, it doesn't work in the Dark Worlds, but it's still there. When you're in the Light World, she pretty much answers from everywhere. Although I haven't tried it, so I could be wrong. Let me know. If you try to call Toriel before Chapter 2, does she pick up? Because that would be pretty damning, I would say. Unless, of course, that fountain was made that night, and the person wasn't hiding in the closet, which is possible, but it seems to be somewhat implied. I did want to bring up, because somebody brought this up in the comments, and I have heard it before, so I wanted to present it to you. The idea that the closet dialogue, which essentially says, it's large enough to fit somebody big inside, could be a reference to Giga Queen, like Queen's mech, because the Queen's Mansion is probably like the server hub, which is in that closet. So it kind of makes sense. If you don't believe that the knight was in there and it's a red herring, then that's probably the explanation for you. Anyway, where? Well, she is a teacher at the school, and she's a fan of raising children. So there is a connection between her and the library in that sense. She's also got, like, the book on humans that's been taken out a bunch, although I don't think she's taken that out specifically recently. And it is after school, so there is a chance she could have done it in Chapter 2. Why? Well, we know that Chris, when interactions with Asgore, we know that Chris isn't really the most open to showing their emotions. And I mean, we already knew that, but even with their family, right? So perhaps this is Toriel's way of allowing Chris to open up on their own, without her having to directly intervene. And that would also explain why the knight is such a mysterious figure. And also why the knight isn't present in the Dark Worlds when the heroes get there. I almost said humans, no, heroes. Because Toriel's arranging all of this as sort of like a play date for Chris in order to come into their own. And how? Well, Toriel isn't really known for traditional weaponry. She uses, like, fire magic in Undertale, right? But she could be associated with knives through her baking. Like, Chris had to get the knife from somewhere. It probably comes from the kitchen. And a use of pencils and pens at the school could transform into a sword in the Dark World, which would be kind of knightly. So, worth a thought. Traits that make her a good candidate. Well, she's extremely doting, so her seeming neglect of Chris's interests is a little bit suspicious. You would think the Toriel that we know from Undertale would be all over trying to, like, force Chris to kind of come out of their shell. Although maybe Toriel's tried that in this universe and we just haven't seen it. I suppose we'll find out in Chapter 3, probably. Toriel might know that something is up with Chris. In Chapter 2, when Chris is in the bathroom and, like, we know that Chris is actually out slashing the tires, probably, because we're just a little soul in a sink cupboard. Toriel says, like, oh, they do this sometimes, which is, like, kind of weirdly, I guess she's not weirded out by it. She's just like, oh, it's just something they do. Which might be because she's trying not to worry Susie, but in fact she does know that something's up with Chris. Because even somebody like Noelle is able to pick up that Chris is acting differently than usual. Like, Rudy can pick it up. Anybody who knows Chris seems to be able to pick it up. Except Asgore, but he's got other things going on, I guess. So you'd think Toriel would be able to as well, right? And maybe she's just sort of hiding her concern for the sake of not, you know, making Chris feel obligated to share their feelings if they don't want to. Like, she's trying to be considerate, but in a way that is not helpful, you know? Toriel is loosely connected to the fountain locations. We already kind of covered this. It would reflect Asgore's role in Undertale, which would be funny if in Deltarune Toriel's our big boss and in Undertale it was Asgore. She does have meta relevance because she is Chris's mother, whereas some of these other Undertale characters don't have that connection to the main cast, you know what I mean? King might have connected with her by being a parent. I think the parent got deleted, but on the slide. Being a parent in a similar tough situation. So we know King loves Lancer, ? Like, when we go to the prison in Chapter 2, he's like, oh, it was just a bluff. My boy bounces. And he seems pretty sad about the whole situation. Lancer doesn't really have that many hard feelings for him either, other than putting him in timeout. So maybe Toriel's desire to want to help her child reflected on King, and that's why King trusts her as the knight. It would also make sense because there's no way that King would immediately connect Chris to Toriel, right? Like, their familial relation is not obvious. And that could tie in with the whole identity crisis thing for Chris that a lot of people speculate. Also, she's seemingly religious, so if you buy into the idea that the knight is trying to create the roaring for religious reasons with the angel, Toriel is probably, like, second to Alvin for being most likely on that case. Okay, Nox against Toriel Knight. Well, she's seemingly joining us in Chapter 3. So a lot of this stuff I was mentioning where I was like, well, this and that could be revealed as her motivations, and why doesn't she say this thing about Chris or whatever? That could come out in Chapter 3, and that might be the point of Chapter 3, in fact. So it might not be that she's the knight, and that's why there's all these hanging threads for her. It's because she's going to be a major player in the next chapter, and that's why there's all these hanging threads. The meta cost. So this is something I'm going to bring up for a lot of these characters. And it's really just me saying, why not a new character? Why somebody from Undertale? Because you'd think, right? Because Deltarune was a concept before Undertale was. And then Undertale was made. That if Toby was going to make one of these characters the boss, let's say, just the main boss of Deltarune, he would use Undertale maybe to foreshadow them, but not necessarily give them a huge major role. So for Toriel, I mean, she's arguably probably got the second most major role in the game, I would say. Like, she's got the most, like, connection to the player and all of this stuff. And maybe that was intentional, because now we're going to invert it in Deltarune, right? But I do think if you're going for the argument that the reason why the Undertale character is the knight in Deltarune is because Undertale was like a foreshadowing to their role, bigger role in Deltarune, you would want to pick a character who has a smaller role in Undertale, right? Which Toriel does not have. She has a very large role. So that's what I mean by meta cost. She's also not particularly knightly. You'd think if she was going to go and play the role of the villain of the story for the benefit of Chris and their friends. Knight wouldn't be the first thing that would come to her mind. Evil Queen, definitely, but Knight, not so much. So it's interesting. There's always the idea that she became a knight in the Dark World because, well, she was holding a pencil at the time and it turned into a sword. But she's not... That's not the first thing I would think about when talking about Toriel, right? And then finally, would she really endanger children to do this? This one's probably my biggest problem with this theory, is that she doesn't really have a motivation to do it. Like, her home life isn't the most happy, but it's not, like, desperate to the point of wanting to, like, blow up the universe for the chance to fix it. Really, her only motivation to do this would be to help her child, and to do so, she'd have to endanger them, like, with threat of death. The person that she's using as their playtime villain has the potential to actually kill them and their friends. I just don't buy Toriel doing it. And something to keep in mind is this is Deltarune Toriel, not Undertale Toriel either. This isn't like the... what do I want to say? Hardened, sort of hermit Toriel, who's been living with the pain of her lost children for hundreds of years, probably. This is just like Mom Toriel, who's been raising a kid and it's been a little tough, you know? So I just don't buy it. All right, Undyne. This is probably the silliest idea, but here we go. Well, she's a lightner, but she's a particularly strong one, so maybe King likes her for that reason. She does have some sway as a police officer to kind of just be able to go wherever she wants in a similar way to the mayor, but not quite as much. We do see her outside the library in Chapter 2, though, so if she did just make that fountain there and then left, it would make sense that she'd show up near it, right? Where? Well, she's not really connected to either location. I mean, maybe she's also into anime in this world, like Alphys introduced it to her in Undertale. So maybe she's into anime and that's why the library was a place where she would be. But she's got like zero connections to the school. So the only reason she would do it there is if she really wanted to endanger some children. Which, look, it's not outside of the possibility of Undyne's characterization, but it's not the first thing I'd think of. Why? I mean, she doesn't seem particularly unhappy in the Deltarune universe. Or, you know, she's got no motivation. I mean, the only thing you could say is she was bored, so maybe she just wants things to be exciting. But you'd think if she was bored, then she'd be exploring the Dark Fountains herself, right? Anyway, well, she is known for being a knight in Undertale, and she probably has a weapon as a police officer. That's really the strongest thing she has going for her. She was a knight once. It's true. She's like the thing that will show up if you search up Undertale Knight. It's her knight armor. She's known to be very determined. We know from Undyne the Undying that she has determination even in Undertale, where that kind of a thing isn't supposed to be possible for monsters. So if making a dark fountain does require a large amount of determination, it is logical that Undyne would have that amount. Whoops, I messed up. There we go. She wishes something exciting would happen, so maybe she's just bored and that's why she's doing it. She has literally taken over Asgore's role in the police force, so maybe that's foreshadowing to her also taking over Asgore's role in the narrative, right? She is a character who isn't the most fleshed out in Undertale. Like, you have that kind of mostly comedic cooking scene and Alphys Undyne date scene. Really, the only thing that gets into her inner character is like the hopes and dreams fight. Like the end fight of the game where you try to save her soul, right? That's like the only thing that really gets into her psyche. Other than that, she's kind of just like, yeah, mean, powerful girl. And that's it. And a True Hero remix for the Knight's battle theme, that would be pretty fire. However, she's got like no relevance to the story. Let's be honest, she's like the most side-charactered of all the characters from Undertale, except for maybe one, but we'll get to him later. And her motivation is pretty weak. And though she could use some more screen time, she's not the most in need of it. Like, she still gets a pretty epic battle in Undertale. 2 of them, really. 2 pretty epic themes, and she's well remembered for those. And there are plenty of other characters in Undertale who have less time to shine than she does. Like, you do have to do the whole Undyne date to get True Pacifist, as well as the Alphys date. So, you do get to see a lot of her, even if it's not really deep. So she's not probably the most needed Undertale character for it. And, as I said before, the meta cost of making her the knight is that she already had a pretty significant role, so it doesn't really make sense to give her another big role. So let's talk about Mettaton. We're going in order. Well, what is Mettaton? A lightner, I think. Ghosts are lightners, right? Do they have souls? I don't know. I think he does, right? Because he uses it as an attack in Undertale. Anyway. But he is one who feels out of place and overshadowed in this world. So maybe that's why King connects with him. The reason I keep saying that, by the way, I should probably preface it for people who haven't watched the other videos in this Knight series, is that King hates lightners. So it's kind of a weird sticking point of why he would decide to work with one lightner and then hate all the other ones. So you would want there to be at least one reason why he sees this lightner and thinks, oh, they're good. And maybe that's the reason. Mettaton feels like he's out of place in this world, which he kind of is. And as a ghost, Mettaton could just phase through the wall and make a fountain literally anywhere. So that's a good point in his favor. Where? Well, the Neobody does suggest that Mettaton has a connection to the library, if Mettaton was the one to draw that. I've seen some people suggest it could be Alphys. And I never really considered that before, but maybe we'll get there. But the reason why he would decide to make one in an unused classroom is very, weird. You know? You'd think it would be places that he wants people to see, I guess, if you know what I mean? Because Mettaton's all about, ratings and being popular. So you would think, if he was doing this for that reason, it wouldn't be an unused classroom. But the library does make sense. So, it's like a half and half point there. Why? Well, he might desire to find himself in this world, or make his dreams reality. If he was the one who drew the Neobody, then maybe that sort of imagination, he wants to make it real through the power of the Dark Worlds. It's not the worst motivation. And then how? He's not really associated with any weapons, usually. He shoots, laser beams. So, we'll just say he used his high heel that he doesn't have yet. Anyway, Mettaton's traits to make him a good candidate. Well, he can go anywhere. We already kind of talked about that. And he has a decent motivation, would do anything to gain an audience. So it does make some sense why he would be creating fountains in public places if that's his motivation. Which a lot of other knight candidates, they can't say that. Maybe, because we know Gaster's important in this game, he's got a connection to Gaster through Alphys and in Undertale. So maybe he's got a connection to Gaster again in this world in some way. And then association to knights might be because he's literally a man in a metal suit. The robot body that Alphys built for him in Undertale, and that he might have basically imagined to be his Dark World form. It might come across as a knight to somebody like King, because he doesn't know what a robot is, It's a metal man, that's a knight to me. And then that name just kind of stuck. Alright, here's the problem, though. Why would making Mettaton the knight be the thing? I mean, you could make the argument that he is somewhat foreshadowed, but not delved deeply into Undertale. He's a pretty big player, but he doesn't really have the same relevance as somebody like Undyne, right? So maybe that's why that was all to foreshadow his role in this story. However, most of the reasons why I think he'd make a decent candidate are from specifically the Undertale universe. Because in the Deltarune universe, the side plot that's been set up for him so far is that he doesn't have any of that sort of stuff from Undertale. He's actually kind of modest and saying, "Oh, darling, you don't want to talk to me. I'm a nobody." So it doesn't seem like he has that, sort of cruel tendency in order to assure he would have viewership. And the fact that a side plot surrounding him is already ongoing, I feel like is a little bit of a point against, right? Because we've already had conversations with him that are entirely missable, right? And I bring this up because this is a point people use against Alvin. Mettaton is entirely missable in this game. You don't have... he's not even on the overworld. He doesn't even have a Deltarune sprite, right? So, because we have this little side plot set up for him already, like we do for, like, Onion-san and another character we'll get to eventually, I feel like that is at least something where you can say, oh, so this is going to be his role in this universe. Maybe not necessarily the main villain, right? We're not saving him for later, like another character we're going to soon talk about. Asgore, that doesn't relate to the last sentence I said. Asgore's just the next candidate. Well, he's a Lightner, but he's another king, so maybe that's why King lights him. Also, I've been using the line stickers for these slides because I just think they're pretty funny. Like, this one's pretty funny. Asgore has 0 line stickers. This poor man. Anyway. He would have to make the fountains at night, most likely, because, I mean, he does have maybe a little bit of a reason to be at the school. Like, oh, I'm just visiting Chris. But Toriel would definitely be like, what are you doing here? Get out of here. So I think he'd have to make that fountain at night. And kind of the same with the library. I mean, he could feasibly go in there, but you'd think people would be talking about, hey, Chris, why was your dad at the library? You know? Where if it was somebody else that Chris isn't so connected to, they might not mention it. I feel like with Asgore, they definitely would. Your dad like anime? I don't know. Something you'd think. Where? Well, both locations do have some relation to Chris, so there is a little bit of a connection there. Though it does paint a little bit of an odd picture of Asgore spying on his child to be like, what can I do to help them? Oh, I know. I'll throw them in a dark world. They'll love it. Anyway, why? Well, it could be for the same reasons as Toriel, which I kind of just implied, which is that, he wants to help Chris come into their own. Or it could be because of his failure to find Des back when he was police chief. We don't know that's the case yet, but it seems somewhat likely. So maybe he's trying to find Des, just like Rudy or whoever else. Or maybe it's just a general dissatisfaction with his life. Maybe he thinks bringing around the Roaring will, like, I don't know, reset the timeline or something silly like that. And that's why he's doing these. So he can have a second chance at trying to, do things right. Which might involve keeping the relationship with the Holiday family more friendly. And making sure things don't fall apart with Toriel. And that Chris has a better, home life. I don't know. That's somewhat of an interesting reason that's different from everyone else. And his weapon is known to be a trident, not specifically anything knightly, but you never know. He is, I will say, I should have mentioned this in the slide. The worn dagger is presumed to be, which the worn dagger or the real knife in Undertale is presumed to be something from Asgore's gardening work, right? And he still does have the gardening shop in Deltarune, so maybe that's what the knife is. Okay, the traits that make him a good candidate. Well, this is basically the same role he played in Undertale. There's kind of a poetic justice to that, right? He's relevant through Chris, and he is a character that could really use some expansion. I mean, I said poor guy earlier because, like, barely anything gets made for Asgore. He doesn't have line stickers. He never shows up in the newsletters. It just seems a little weird to omit this major character, right? And maybe that's because he's going to end up playing a bigger role in this story, and we're saving that stuff for later. I just mentioned this, but he's weirdly not featured in any of the newsletters. Like, there are way more obscure characters that get sprites that he doesn't. And he's known for being a little morally dubious in his plans to help those that he cares about. In Undertale, yeah, he'll kill 6 children in order to save the monsters, even though he won't like it. So in Deltarune, who's to say he won't do some dubious stuff in order to try to help his family somehow? Not really sure, but something like that. He was fired from his position as chief of police, which we only know from, like, a flyer. Like a newspaper clipping that Undyne had up there. And we know he's in trouble with rent with the mayor. So, you know, his life isn't going great in this universe. He has deep connections to Rudy, who is someone who is dying. So, again, another point to say Asgore has reasons to want to try to change things. And he's known for his big knightly armor with a giant Deltarune symbol on it. It's actually just the angel is the symbol, but if you read the pauldrons, the 3 pauldrons as triangles, then it's the Deltarune symbol, right? So, you know, that's something. But here's the problems. This is the same role he played in Undertale. Why would we do that again? is Asgore just fated to be kind of a bad guy in all universes? That'd be kind of sad. It would feel weird, like I was saying, opportunity cost before meta cost of other characters who had big battles. It would be even crazier to be like, yeah, it's just the same guy again. Enjoy. Like, even if the battle's different. Like, what? And then the other thing I have here is too obvious. Because, like, oh, Asgore's the villain. Oh, wow. I can't believe it. I'm so surprised, you know? It wouldn't really be that much of a reveal. It'd be like, oh, we're just doing Undertale again. Okay. Okay, I forgot to mention this in the original recording, so let me just mention it now. The reason why I think Asgore isn't featured in the newsletters isn't because Toby's really hiding him for Deltarune. It's because he's hiding him for Undertale. Let's be honest. It is the Undertale Deltarune newsletter, right? And Asgore being a little softy, kind of a soft lad who ruins everything, is supposed to be a twist in Undertale, right? He's kind of like the twist villain of Undertale. And I think the reason why he doesn't show up in all this promotional material is that Toby doesn't want that promotional material spoiling the game he's promoting, which is Undertale, at least halfway. Obviously, most people who read the newsletter have already played Undertale. But there are people who have not played Undertale, and people are going to use the sprites from the newsletters in thumbnails, and they're going to be posted on Reddits and stuff. And, like, the odds of somebody who hasn't played Undertale seeing them are still really low unless they're searching for them. But they're more possible if Toby puts them out there. And I think that's why Asgore's been banished to jail, to no fun jail. Along with characters like Asriel, which we never see. We'll only see Flowey, and Kara, who doesn't show up very often either. Or Gaster, who wasn't allowed to show up in, like, the tarot cards and stuff. Because they're all supposed to be, like, twists and mysteries that Toby doesn't want people being spoiled to before actually playing the game and figuring out what that twist is. So, I thought I'd add that. Alright, we're getting into the good ones now, okay? These are the ones that I have some feelings towards that aren't negative. We're starting with Alphys, or Alphys. I think it's actually supposed to be Alphys, right? I always said Alphys, but Alphys. I can do that. So Alphys is a Lightner, but she's well known as being kind of a daydreamer. The queen of living in a fantasy world, as I said, and dodging reality, which might be the most important part, which really does fit in with the themes of the Dark Worlds and the sort of conflict we seem to be setting up with characters like Susie, who think the Dark Worlds are awesome and don't really like the Light World that much. Alphys would be a good character to sort of reflect that. When? Well, she's a teacher at the school, so she probably has keys. She could get in at any time. And she doesn't have, like, a dependent like Chris, where she'd have to explain to them what she's doing. She could just do it. Also, she crashes on her bike in Chapter 2. Fleeing the scene, perhaps? Like, okay. We know that, obviously in Undertale, Alphys and Undyne get together. But in Deltarune, they don't even know each other. So it is possible that the reason she crashes on her bike after seeing Undyne isn't because it's Undyne, but instead because it's a police officer, and she just broke into the library, and she's feeling very self-conscious about it. Also, in Chapter 2, in the hometown dialogue section, if you go to talk to her about her bike crash, she says,
Hey, have you checked out the library's teen zone? No reason you should do that.
So you could interpret that as Alfie's trying to lead people to the Dark Fountain for whatever reason. Or maybe she knows that Chris is one of the heroes specifically. Because she does let Chris slide on a lot of stuff, right? And that's just kind of Alfie's personality of being pretty passive. But potentially there could be the double motive of knowing that Chris just went through a harrowing adventure the last day, and so not going too hard on them for sleeping through class. Anyway. Where? Well, she is, as I just mentioned, heavily associated with both the library and the school. And her pointing... I talked about this with Noelle Knight, right? How Noelle seems to want to go to the closet with Susie. Wonk, I will say. But Alphys is actually the one who makes sure it's Susie and Chris. So if she knows about some sort of prophecy, maybe, then that would explain why she's so adamant that Susie and Chris go, and won't let Noelle go with them. And yeah, everything I already said. So why? Well, maybe she wants to escape into a fantasy world, or maybe it's some obtuse way of helping her students. Maybe she's trying to carry on the work of Gerson or Gaster. Really, you could pretty much say anything for Alphys, and it kind of makes sense with her personality. Because her whole personality is avoiding reality in Undertale, basically. So, the Dark Worlds are about avoiding reality. So any motivation you come up with will make a little bit of sense. Though I do want to note that Gerson's classroom is the first place where a Dark Fountain is opened. And there's seemingly some emphasis put on Gerson. So maybe the reason why Alphys knows about the Dark Fountains is because Gerson passed this knowledge down to her as his successor, quote unquote. And this was a way he used to teach his students. And this is Alphys kind of botching it, maybe. Anyway, how? Well, she's not associated with a particular weapon. She does love anime. So maybe that's why she decides to become a knight in the Dark World, because she wants a freaking cool anime sword. Anyway. Alphys traits that make her a good candidate. Well, she's a relevant character who is in desperate need for expanding and readjustment. I think Alphys might be like the most hated Undertale character. She's probably at least the most disliked main cast member from Undertale. So, it would be nice if she got a story to sort of flesh her out a little bit more. Even though I think Undertale does a pretty good job of it, I will say the text message thing, as much as it does fit her character, was pretty annoying. So I can understand kind of why people don't like her, because she's sort of meant to be a little unlikable, right? But you're supposed to sort of come to understand her throughout the pacifist route. And I've watched a lot of Undertale playthroughs in my time. Not everybody gets there. There's a lot of people who are just like, oh, I have to deal with Alphys. Oh, I don't want to do the True Lab, you know what I mean? So, yeah. She has strong connections to Gaster, at least in the Undertale timeline. So maybe that's why Gaster's chosen to give her this special role. Seems how he seems to be pulling the strings behind this whole survey program. She has scales and loves anime, potentially tying her to the idea of a knight. She does have natural armor as a lizard, I guess. She definitely chooses to escape into a fantasy world. That's probably the strongest point. She's trying to direct the gang to both fountain locations. I already kind of touched on that. What is this group project, right? Chris has slept through both lessons where we've learned about it. And it's kind of weird that we don't know specifically what kind of group project it is. They have to go to the library for it. But, like, to do what? Do they have to research, like, something to make, like, a book report? Like, what are they doing? And the real answer is probably that it just doesn't really matter. But maybe the group project that Alphys is actually proposing is going to turn out to be the Dark Worlds themselves, and it's getting the class to all come together and, you know, work together to beat this narrative. It's like a team building exercise, but with danger that Alphys might not be entirely aware of, but Gerson probably was. That's my thought. And then finally, Nox against Alphys Knight. Well, would making Alphys a villain in this story really help with her fandom characterization problem? Probably not, right? People just be like, oh, of course Alphys is doing all this stupid stuff. Oh, you know? So maybe this is not the best way to solve that problem. The meta cost of making Alphys the knight. Alphys has like no connection to anybody. There's like a slight tinge of it where I feel like, oh, well, it's about the class coming together more so than the knight themselves in this explanation. But like, you still kind of want the knight to be important, or you'd think, to the characters themselves, you know? It would make sense if our main character was like Susie and Alphys was like her mortal nemesis or something. But really, the way it is, Susie's are like deuteragonists at most, and Alphys is just kind of a background character. Why would she make herself the villain? That's an interesting prompt, right? If her whole idea behind this is to help the students, then why would she be the villain of that story? And if the whole idea behind it is she's trying to escape into a fantasy world, then why would she play the role of the villain in that world? You know what I mean? Why would the king respect her? He's really got no reason to. If anything, Alphys would be the Lightner he'd hate the most. She's the kind of person to buy a lot of things and then not, you know, just like keep them on a shelf, not use them for their intended purpose, right? So, if anything, King would hate her. And then why would she endanger the kids? Okay, well, maybe in Undertale she would endanger the kids, but would she do that in this universe? I don't know. All right, it's time. You've been waiting. This is the one you wanted to know the most about. Well, I assume. A lot of people like the idea of Papyrus Knight. I am not one of them, but we'll get there. So what is Papyrus? Well, he's a Lightner, but one who is similarly forgotten to King. That's King's whole hatred of the Lightners thing, right? It's that Lightners have cast us into obscurity because they're not using the objects in the classroom anymore. Papyrus also seems to be kind of quote-unquote forgotten in the Deltarune world. He's not like nobody knows him. He's just kind of missing in action the whole time, even though we're looking for him. So there might be some overlap there. When? Well, he would definitely have to be discreet about it because he doesn't really belong in the school at all. And the library, like, nobody knows who this guy is. So seeing a complete stranger come into the library in this small town would be something somebody you'd think would talk about. Though, the pun of him being the skeleton in our closets is pretty funny. Because actually, I don't think people have really talked about this before, but both locations, both the closet Dark Fountain, then into the unused classroom, and the closet in the computer lab, might suggest that the knight created these fountains from the closet, right? And then, like, it created another dark world when they got to the Card Kingdom. So maybe it's just an elaborate skeletons in your closet joke. Where? Let's be real. Papyrus has no connection to either of these locations. I mean, the skeletons are new in town. Sure, Papyrus wants to be famous online, but he doesn't have a personal computer at all. I mean, you can make the same argument that I guess Metaton doesn't seemingly have one either, but I don't know. Maybe he just doesn't have a good art program on his, or he can't use it because he's a ghost, or maybe Alphys made it. I don't know. Anyway, Papyrus has just no connection to the library or the school. He's got absolutely zero reason to be at the school. He's got a little bit of a more reason to be at the library because at least it's a public place, but like it's still like not that strong. Why? Well, maybe Papyrus is trying to fulfill his dreams in this world where you can't become a royal guard, but he still wants to be a super cool hero who everybody likes or something, right? So he's like, I'll do it in the dark worlds. Or maybe he's just trying to make friends, you know? That's fine. That's a potential. How? Well, Papyrus is known for using bone magic, for the lack of a better word. And one could act as his knife. But that said, Lightners seemingly can't use magic in Deltarune, so the whole bone magic thing kind of goes out the window. So I guess maybe he's just using like a pen or a pencil, like I was suggesting for somebody like Toriel. There's nothing too particular that would point to him weapon-wise. All right, the traits that make him a good candidate. Well, he has connections to knights. He wants to be a royal guard. In Undertale, he's training under Undyne. He's very naive. So I assume, and I think most other people assume, that the knight isn't specifically trying to cause the roaring, because if they were, why don't they just keep making fountains all day, right? It's some sort of like Rouse misinterpretation, or they don't know the consequences of their actions. Papyrus is a character who would not know the consequences of his actions in doing something like this. He's associated with final bosses, specifically Sans, and a lot of people have done like Sans-esque Papyrus fights, right? Disbelief Papyrus. So maybe that sort of culminated in Toby's mind. He's like, yeah, okay. And then he's also connected to Gaster. So everything I said about Mettaton and Alphys also kind of applies. Both he and Queen have a special attack that fail. Queen's is because of lack of internet, and for Papyrus it's because a dog steals it. But in both cases, this is a very specific mention of a special attack that doesn't end up working out. He has good motivation for wanting to open the fountains. He wants to fulfill his dreams or find friends, or maybe he just wants people who think he's cool. And he opened a dark fountain once by accident, and all the Darkners loved him, and he never wants to go back. It's sort of the same thing I was talking about with like mirroring Susie in that way. He's a very popular character in the newsletters, with whole segments dedicated to him, despite the fact he has not shown up in Deltarune at all. Now, to be fair, these are Undertale Deltarune newsletters, so his non-appearance in Deltarune doesn't preclude him from showing up in those. But, you know, it is a lot of emphasis on a character who isn't in the thing that is currently being worked on, you know? He is suspiciously busy, quote-unquote, so far in Deltarune. The Steam page for Deltarune even says Papyrus is busy. Or I think it's the Steam page. It's something like that, specifically. So what's he busy doing, huh? Making fountains? He kind of gets overshadowed by Sans in the fandom because, you know, Megalovania and everything. So maybe he could use some more spotlight in this way to show that he's also super cool epic. He does have thematic connections to Deltarune, which is, you know, in being someone who kind of lives in his own fantasy world sometimes, and also someone who feels kind of lonely and in need of a nice, friendly world to hang out in for a while. Has control? So, I'll just spoil it now. This is the video I watched to try to understand Papyrus Knight, right? Because I'd always heard people throw it around, but I didn't really understand it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch Papyrus Knight Theory. This was the first one that showed up. It seemed pretty well produced. It's by Insanely ADD, which you can find a link to the video in the description if you want to watch it. I'm assuming most Papyrus Knight people have, because it seemed to be the biggest video about it. That said, they posit that there is this element with Papyrus about control, which in Deltarune we obviously have the theme that our choices don't matter. In Undertale, our choices do matter, right? But Papyrus is able to sort of brute force his way through them all. If we choose to insult Papyrus, he doesn't take it hard. In fact, he turns it around on us, right? If we kill Papyrus, he never changes his personality. He never gets bitter at us. He always believes in us. So in a way, no matter what we do to Papyrus, his sort of being never changes. It's almost like our choices with him don't matter. So maybe that's being carried over to Deltarune, where the theme is your choices don't matter, and the reality of the situation is going to be that the reason because of that is because Papyrus is involved. And there's this weird subplot that started with Sans that seems to imply we might not meet for Papyrus for a long time. Which would make sense if he's like a boss that is going to be showing up. Alright, brace yourselves. Knocks against Papyrus Knight. And I want to be clear, I love Papyrus. He's probably my favorite Undertale character. I was going to say second favorite to maybe Flowey / Asriel. But no, I think I like Papyrus more.
I do the Skeletor voice for him, and it's very funny.
And just like, he's very jokey, but in like the best way. Like, I don't think he has like, he doesn't overstay his welcome ever, despite being very involved in the story. I think Papyrus is great. However, I don't like Papyrus Knight. And here's why. There's a huge meta cost to making Papyrus the Knight, okay? Papyrus has no connection to anyone in Deltarune. Papyrus has no stakes in our current plot in Deltarune. He's not in the game yet, really. Like, he's in the game files, but that's it. Maybe he's connected to Gaster, but arguably Sans would be way more connected to Gaster if we're reaching to Undertale connections, because we don't even know if Papyrus is connected to Gaster in this world, right? He's got no connections to Chris, no connections to either of the knight locations. Papyrus is a cool knight in theory, but as for the actual game building up to him, there's been almost no build up to him at all. And okay, this is a little mean-spirited. This video, right? They said in the video that, well, Alvin is an interesting knight candidate. The game, he's completely skippable, right? And the game doesn't focus on him at all. Well, Papyrus is even more skippable. Alvin doesn't have a talk sprite. Papyrus doesn't have a talk. He doesn't have a single line of dialogue. So if he's going to be like a twist reveal, it relies entirely on the person having played Undertale beforehand, which the game does say, you know, this is a game for people who have played Undertale. However, it's not a direct sequel. And the universes are very separate. So if you're relying on your context from Undertale specifically to understand Papyrus as a knight candidate, because he doesn't show up in Deltarune at all, I think it's at least worth thinking of that and saying, does that really make sense? You know? It's at least on the same level as Alvin Knight, of being like really cool in theory, but we just don't have anything, right? Second point, he's too nice. But actually, for once, I agree. Usually when I put these in here, I'm like, yeah, I guess Noelle's a nice person, but she could be pushed to this point. We just kind of went over the Papyrus. You can't push him to a point where he will do something bad. You know what I mean? Like, he'll always believe in you, even when you're a murderer. Why would Papyrus put a despot like King into power? That is not in his wheelhouse at all. King would have had to trick him, and King seems to respect the knight more so than have used the knight, which, I mean, I made a whole rules knight theory, so maybe I shouldn't be talking, but at the same time, that does seem like something Papyrus would never do. Why would he make the fountains in public? If his whole goal is just to have a fantasy world where he can make friends, and the thematic thing is he's like regressing into this fantasy land, why make the fountains in public in general? It just means they're going to get closed by other people. And then all his friends get stolen from him? That's even worse. Why would he choose the school? He's got zero connection to the school. Like, does he want the teenagers to think he's cool? That's like the only thing I can think of. Why would he leave the cyber world without even interacting with it, seemingly? Like, if Papyrus's whole goal is to make friends through the Dark Worlds, why would he not just join Noelle and Birdley on their adventures in the Dark World? You know what I mean? And be like, yes, it is I, the wondrous knight, here to help you in your journey through this crazy, crazy land. Instead, he's like, nope, I got a dip. Like, why would he do that? Also, I do not buy the idea that Papyrus is overshadowed, okay? Maybe he's not as popular as Sans in meme culture, but he is the most utilized Undertale character. Like I just said, he has whole segments dedicated to him in the newsletter. If you showed people who've never played Undertale the lineup of Undertale characters, they'd point out Sans, maybe then they'd point out Toriel, but after that it's definitely Papyrus. And I think it's possible Papyrus could be second because he's always in the meme videos with Sans. Papyrus is not an underutilized character, is basically what I'm trying to say. So giving him more spotlight here isn't necessary to help him out in any way. So you'd think he would be important to this world, but no. And then finally, he's got this side plot going on, right? Where Sans is like, you should meet my brother, but we end up not doing it. And you know what that side plot relies on? It relies on you wanting to talk to Papyrus because you already like him. Sorry, that might have been a little bit of too much digging. Anyway, the side plot is probably going to be resolved eventually with us either meeting Papyrus or finding out Papyrus doesn't exist in this world. He's like the only Undertale character we haven't seen, so obviously Toby is holding him for a reason. But is the reason really that he's the main villain? I know people like Papyrus getting a bigger role, and again, it's because Papyrus is like a really popular Undertale character. But we've got all these fan works that have already done it. It just feels like a waste to me, a little bit, to make this entire like mystery setup and have it be Papyrus at the end. Like, it'd be cool, don't get me wrong, and I'd like it because I like Papyrus. I just don't think it really makes sense. At least not where we're at in the current game. Get back to me after chapter 4 when Papyrus shows up and he has like a big sword that he's carrying around or something. But for now, I will say, I feel like he's even less relevant than Alvin. But this video wouldn't be finished without at least one crack theory, alright? I always gotta have one. And originally it was gonna be Gaster, but as I was looking at the Undertale characters, there's one that stood out to me even more. Mad Mew Mew. So, Mad Mew Mew is a console-exclusive Undertale character that is only available in the Switch and Xbox versions of the game, I do believe. Maybe she was added to PlayStation later, but I know she specifically was made for the Switch, I do believe, release, and then came over in the Xbox release. Maybe PlayStation doesn't even have it, does it? I don't know. Anyway, all the benefits we talked about with Mettaton apply to Mew Mew, but with basically none of the downsides. The downsides for Mettaton was there's already a side plot involving Mettaton. Mettaton is completely sort of different in this world, it seems. And Mettaton, all of the evidence for Mettaton had a huge amount of relevance in Undertale in being one of the main boss fights, having like 3 themes, basically ruling the entire area of Hotland, even more than Alphys, who's actually the character associated there. Mew Mew does not have that. Mew Mew seems to be acting exactly the same as Mad Dummy used to in Undertale, through like the one dialogue we've got from knocking on the door. She's not associated with the Mettaton side plot, really, other than answering the door. And she did not have a big role in Undertale, only showing up in those console releases, and even then, before that, you could only generously call Mad Dummy a mini-boss. So, you know, room for expansion? Hell yeah! And compared to somebody like Asgore, who was a main character, Mew Mew's in the newsletters a lot. Seems to be a character Toby likes incorporating in the newsletters, which if she's gonna get a bigger role in this story, maybe that's why. She was Undyne's training dummy in Undertale. Undyne's a knight! This is the exact same reasoning I gave, or this is exact same sort of reasoning that Papyrus kind of has, as being somebody who was, you know, wanting to train to be a knight. Mew Mew, same thing. Mew Mew was Undyne's training dummy, right? Wants to train with Undyne, knight connection. Has a huge amount of potential for boss fights. I mean, we have never seen Mad Mew Mew EX and the Split Soul. Oh, this is such like an idea that is just implanted in my brain now. The Split Soul that's made to represent the Joy-Cons could represent the player and Chris, or Chris and the vessel, or something like that in a big boss fight against her. Where, like, you know, we're controlling both at once. The red half of the soul represents us, the player, while the light blue half represents Chris, who is light blue in the Dark Worlds. It all comes together. Also, the remix of what is Mew Mew's boss theme called? I don't even know. Catfight, let's just say. The remix of it would be probably crazy, you know? It's already like the ghost fight theme, so you know it's going to be good, but now it's like epic and dark. It'd be crazy. But does she have motive? Yes, yes, yes! So I watched the Mad Mew Mew boss fight, which I'd never watched before. And here are some lines that she says in it. I need tension, conflict, something to bring out my anger. Combat, bloodlust, destruction. It's the perfect emotional cocktail to fuse with my new body. Mew. So the idea that Mew Mew is creating these dark fountains specifically for the tension, the conflict of being foiled in order to eventually fuse with a vessel in this world. A vessel? Oh my god. Anyway. Another line. Don't you think I could easily become the world's cutest Dullahan? So I had to find out what this is. Apparently Dullahan, I think it was it? I don't remember. It's folklore. It's essentially the Headless Horseman, right? And what is the Headless Horseman? Well, a knight. It's all a hint. And then the wiki says, although she's described as a life-size doll during most of the fight, it's revealed that she's an animatronic character once she's defeated violently, which means metal. Same as Metaton, knight associations. It's so perfect. Genuinely, when I saw the line, don't you think I could easily become the world's cutest Dullahan? I was like, oh, it's all been a hint. The reason why she actually says that in the battle is because you're using fight against her in order to try to fuse it with her vessel, right? And her head is flying off. That's why she's making the comparison to a headless horseman. But no, it's actually foreshadowing for her being the knight, okay? Thank you for watching. This was Undertale Knights. You might have noticed there's some missing people. Kara, Asriel, Gaster, Sans. I mentioned why I didn't do Gaster and Sans. But that's because I want to do those kind of wacky wild choices like Asriel in their own video. So pretty soon there'll be another community post I'll put out on which knight video we'll do next. We're almost at the end here. We've got like 3 more to go, I think. Which is the classmates, everybody in Chris's class at the school, Asriel / Kara / no, that's pretty much it. The vessel, I get, no, Asriel / Kara is one, and then Chris Knight / the vessel is another one. So we'll, those are our next 3. Vote for which one you want. Thanks for watching. Bye.